I came home early with a pastry box still warm on my passenger seat, cinnamon and fried sugar filling the cab of my old Silverado like a cheap comfort. I wasn't even inside the kitchen when I heard my wife's voice, low urgent, the kind of whisper that isn't meant for daylight. If he finds out Linda said we lose everything. And then Megan, my stepdaughter, the kid I helped raise, answered calm as a woman reading a grocery list. He won't. He never looks. I stood there with my hand still on the doorknob, my breath caught in my throat, and for a second the whole world narrowed down to one simple stupid sound, the soft click of my own key turning, like I just locked myself out of my own life. I'm telling you that moment first because that's where it all ended up anyway. Right there at the edge of my kitchen, hearing the truth the hard way. But the cliff I fell off didn't start that night. It started years earlier in Des Moines, Iowa, in a little 2-story house on a street where folks mow their lawns on Saturday and wave like they mean it. My name is Richard Halverson. Everybody calls me Rick. I was 56 that winter with a bad left knee from too many ladders and too many school boiler rooms, and a job that didn't make headlines but kept the city running. I was the maintenance manager for the Des Moines Public Schools. That meant I knew what it sounded like when a system was about to fail. A boiler doesn't just die. A pipe doesn't just burst. First there's a rattle, a hiss, a drip that shows up in the ceiling tile like a bruise. You learn to listen. I thought I'd been listening at home too. Linda and I had been married 15 years. She was 52, worked the front desk at a dental office on Fleur Drive, and she was the kind of woman who knew everyone's birthday and forgot her own. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't cruel. She was practical. At least that's what I told myself whenever she got sharp with me about money or told me I was too soft with Megan. Megan was 29 then, Linda's daughter from her first marriage. Her biological dad, Tony, lived out in Council Bluffs and showed up when he felt like it. I showed up every day. I paid for braces. I taught her how to drive in the empty parking lot behind the Hy-Vee. I sat in the bleachers at her volleyball games with a thermos of coffee while the wind cut through my jacket. When she graduated from Iowa State, I cried harder than Linda did. Not because I'm sentimental, because I'm not usually, but because it felt like proof that all those years of trying to be steady meant something. So when Megan called me dad, I believed it. That Friday, the day I came home early with the pastries, started like any other. It was early December, the kind of cold that makes the sky look like aluminum. I'd been up since 5 because one of the elementary schools had a boiler making a noise I didn't like. I spent the morning in a concrete room that smelled like rust and wet cardboard, listening to the old unit rattle like it had something to say. By noon, we had it under control. A worn coupling, nothing dramatic. But the superintendent had a meeting the principal wanted reassurance, and by the time I finally climbed into my truck, my shoulders felt like they were full of sand. On the way home, I passed a little bakery off Ingersoll Kaufman's, the one Linda loved, because the owner always put an extra donut in the box for Rick. Linda liked the apple fritters, and Megan had a soft spot for glazed twists. It had become a small routine, my peace offering, after a long week. I walked in, the bell over the door jingling, and the heat hit my face like a hand. The place smelled like yeast and cinnamon and vanilla. For a moment, I was just a tired guy buying sweets for his family. The woman behind the counter smiled. "Rick, you're early." "Boiler behaved," I said, and she laughed like she'd heard that line 100 times. I drove home with the box on the seat beside me. I remember thinking about how Linda would roll her eyes and say, "You're spoiling us," and how Megan would pretend not to care, but always take the first bite. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't announce itself. It waits until you're feeling generous. I pulled into the driveway at 3:47 p.m. I know because my truck clock had been running 5 minutes fast since summer, and I'd stopped trusting it. I glanced at my phone out of habit. 3:47 exactly. Linda's car was there. That surprised me. She usually didn't get home from the dental office until after 5. I carried the pastry box up the walkway. The air smelled like snow and dead leaves. The porch light was still on, even though it was daylight. Linda did that sometimes when she was home, like she didn't want the house to feel empty. When I opened the front door, I stepped into quiet. No TV, no radio, just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the wall clock Linda had bought at Hobby Lobby because it looked farmhouse. I hung my coat on the hook by the door and took one step toward the kitchen. That's when I heard them. Linda's voice first coming from the kitchen like it was leaking out through the cabinets. If he finds out, she whispered, we lose everything. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My hand tightened around the pastry box until the cardboard bowed a little. Megan answered from somewhere near the table. He won't. He never looks. Linda's voice shook. Rick isn't stupid. He's not, Megan said. He's just busy. He doesn't want to fight. That's why this works. There was a scraping sound, chair legs on vinyl flooring, a paper rustle. Then Megan again, quieter. Mom, you did the right thing. We didn't have a choice. Linda sighed. I hate lying to him. It's not lying, Megan said, and the ease in her tone made my stomach turn. It's protecting him, protecting us. I stood there like I'd been turned to stone. The kitchen doorway was just ahead, but I couldn't bring myself to step into it. Part of me wanted to burst in and demand answers. Another part, the bigger part, wanted to back out of my own house and pretend I'd never heard my name spoken like that. I glanced down without meaning to, and that's when I saw it. On the edge of the kitchen counter, half covered by a dish towel, there was a folder, a manila folder with a bright blue sticky note stuck on top. The note had my name on it in Linda's handwriting. Rick, do not move. My throat went dry. Linda's voice went on. What if Frank at the credit union calls? What if they mail something? Megan made a sound like she was annoyed. They won't call the house. Everything's online. And you already changed the mailing address. Change the mailing address. My mind tried to grab hold of that phrase, but it slipped through my fingers like smoke. I felt my heart beat in my ears. I could taste the sugar in the air from the pastry box, and suddenly it made me sick. Linda spoke again, and there was panic in it. Megan, please tell me you're sure this paper is okay, that the signature... The signature is fine, Megan cut in. It looks like his. He signs 1,000 work orders a week. You think he's going to compare it? Signature. My knees went weak. I swallowed and the sound felt loud inside my own head. Linda lowered her voice even more. If he finds out, we lose everything. And then like a bad echo, Megan repeated it back with a kind of confidence that made me colder than the Iowa winter outside. He won't. I should tell you something about me. I'm not a yeller. I'm not a man who throws punches or smashes dishes. I spent my whole life fixing things, and you don't fix anything by slamming a wrench around. You fix it by staying calm, by figuring out where the leak is, by turning off the water before the whole place floods. So I did the only thing my body would let me do in that moment. I stepped back. The floorboard under my boot creaked. Both voices stopped instantly. Silence fell over the kitchen like a blanket. I froze. My heart hammered so hard I thought they'd hear it. Then Linda called out, trying to sound normal. Rick, is that you? I couldn't answer. If I opened my mouth, I wasn't sure what would come out. A shout, a sob, something ugly. I tightened my grip on the pastry box. My fingers were shaking. And that's when the stupid box slipped. It hit the hardwood with a soft thud, not loud but loud enough. The lid popped and one glazed twist rolled out like it was trying to escape. I stared at it. I actually stared at a donut on my floor like it was the most important thing in my life. Because right then I needed something simple to focus on, something I could fix. I bent down slowly, my knee complaining, and picked up the twist. Sticky glaze clung to my thumb. Behind me, footsteps approached. Linda's slippers soft on the wood. I didn't look up. Rick, she said gently like I was a skittish dog. Honey, you're home early. I set the donut back in the box. My hands were clumsy. The box was smudged now, like my whole afternoon. Yeah, I managed my voice coming out rough. Boiler issue, got it handled. Linda knelt beside me, helping close the lid. She smelled like peppermint toothpaste and laundry detergent. Oh, she said too bright. That's good. I still didn't look at her. I couldn't. Not yet. Over her shoulder, I saw Megan in the kitchen doorway. She had her arms crossed, her face blank, but her eyes were sharp, measuring, calculating. She smiled and it didn't reach her eyes. Hey, Dad, she said. Dad. I felt something inside me shift, not break all at once, but slip like a bolt coming loose. Hey, I said back, and I hated how normal I sounded. Linda stood up, smoothing her sweater. You didn't have to bring pastries. They were there, I said. I cleared my throat. Thought you'd like them. Megan walked over and reached into the box like nothing had happened, like I hadn't just heard her talk about forging my signature. She grabbed an apple fritter and took a bite. She said, mouthful. Still the best in town. I watched her chew, and I realized something that made my stomach twist harder than the cold outside ever could. They were acting, and I was the only one who didn't have a script. So I nodded once like I was fine, like I believed them. Then I picked up the pastry box and carried it into the kitchen right past the manila folder with my name on it, right past the blue sticky note that said, "Do not move." I set the box down on the table and forced myself to smile. Inside my head, though, a different kind of voice had started up, quiet, steady, and colder than Linda's whisper. "Okay, Rick. Find the leak. Turn off the water. Then make them watch what happens when you do." I didn't sleep that night. Not in the way people mean when they say they tossed and turned. I lay there flat on my back staring at the ceiling fan as it made one slow, tired circle after another, listening to Linda's breathing beside me like it was coming from another house. Every few minutes, my mind replayed the same words over and over. If he finds out, we lose everything. At some point after midnight, I slid out of bed without waking her. The floor was cold on my feet. I stood in the hallway for a long moment listening, making sure both Linda and Megan were asleep. When you've worked maintenance as long as I have, you learn the sound of a building at rest. The house was quiet in that deep, honest way. No footsteps, no voices, just the tick of the thermostat kicking on. I went into the spare bedroom we used as an office. The door creaked just a little. I winced and paused, heart pounding, but nothing stirred. I turned on the desk lamp and shut the door behind me. The light fell on a mess I'd ignored for years, stacks of old tax returns, instruction manuals for appliances we no longer owned, birthday cards Linda couldn't bring herself to throw away. In the corner sat the filing cabinet, a dented gray thing I'd picked up from a surplus sale at the school district for $20. I pulled open the top drawer. Folders slid against each other with a dry whisper. Utilities, insurance, medical, mortgage. My fingers hesitated on that last one. Easy, I murmured to myself the way I did when loosening a rusted bolt, slow and steady. I took the mortgage folder out and laid it flat on the desk. The original paperwork was there, just like it should be. My signature, Linda's signature dates I remembered. I felt a small, foolish surge of relief. See, my brain tried to say, "You're imagining things." Then I opened the second drawer. That's where the newer stuff was. A thick envelope from the credit union folded tight. A printed statement with a logo I recognized immediately, Midwest Community Credit Union, the same place Linda and I had banked since before Megan got her driver's license. My eyes went straight to the words printed in bold. Secured loan. My chest tightened. I picked up the statement, my fingers trembling just enough that I noticed. The numbers swam for a second before settling into place. Amount, interest rate, term. And then the line that made my stomach drop through the floor. Collateral primary residence. Our house. My house. 30 years of early mornings, overtime shifts, skipped vacations. The place where I'd replace shingles myself to save a few $1,000s. The place I planned to grow old in. I flipped the page. There it was. My name. My signature. Or something that was supposed to be. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. It felt like someone had put a hand on my chest and decided to see how long I could hold out. I opened my eyes again and studied the signature like it was a broken part under a flashlight. It wasn't right. Close, sure, close enough to fool a quick glance, but not right. The R leaned too far forward. The tail on the K was too short. The pressure was uneven, heavy in places where my hand usually lifted. It was like looking at a bolt that had been cross-threaded tight enough to hold for a while, but doomed to strip under stress. I didn't sign this, I whispered. The words hung in the air, useless but necessary. I kept digging. Another statement, then another. Email printouts, an address change confirmation. Megan's apartment address. I checked the date on that one and felt something in my chest go cold. 3 months ago. 3 months they'd been doing this behind my back. I glanced at the door, half expecting Linda to burst in and demand to know what I was doing, but the house stayed quiet, indifferent. I thought about waking her, shaking her, forcing her to explain, but I didn't, because another thought had crept in, slow and heavy. If I let them know, I lose control. And control was the only thing keeping the whole system from blowing apart. By the time the sun came up, my eyes burned and my head throbbed. I put everything back exactly where I'd found it. The folders went back in the same order. The drawer slid shut with the same soft resistance. I turned off the lamp and stood there in the dark office listening to the house wake up. Linda was already in the kitchen when I came out. Coffee brewing. The radio on low tuned to the local AM station that talked more about weather and farm reports than politics. She smiled when she saw me. "You look tired." "Didn't sleep great," I said. It wasn't a lie. Megan came out of the spare room a minute later, hair pulled up, phone in her hand. She gave me a quick hug like she always did. "Morning, Dad." "Morning," I said, and my voice didn't crack. That felt like a victory. I ate my toast. I drank my coffee. I listened to them talk about nothing traffic on I-235, a patient at Linda's office who wouldn't stop complaining a job interview Megan had lined up soon. Every word felt like it weighed a pound. After breakfast, Linda grabbed her purse. "I might be late tonight," she said. "Inventory at the office." "Okay," I replied. Megan waved. "I've got errands." They left together laughing about something I didn't catch. The front door closed. I stood there alone in the kitchen staring at the counter where the manila folder had been the day before. It was gone now. I exhaled slowly. "All right," I said to the empty room. "Let's see how bad this really is." That afternoon, instead of going back to the maintenance office, I drove to the credit union. Midwest Community Credit Union sat in a low brick building near a strip mall, same as it always had. I'd walked in there 100 times without thinking twice. This time my palms were slick on the steering wheel. Inside, it smelled like carpet cleaner and printer toner. A flat-screen TV in the corner played muted news. I didn't go to the counter. I sat in the waiting area with a copy of a pamphlet about retirement accounts and watched people come and go. A young couple opening their first checking account. An older woman cashing a check. Ordinary life moving along like nothing was wrong. Finally, I recognized a man stepping out of an office down the hall. Frank Dwyer. He was older than me, early 60s, with thinning gray hair and a gait that suggested his knees complained as much as mine. We'd known each other for years, not well, but enough. His son had gone to one of the schools I managed, and we'd crossed paths at the VFW post more than once. I stood. "Frank," I called softly. He looked up, squinted, then smiled. "Rick Halverson. Haven't seen you in a bit." "Got a minute?" I asked. He studied my face for half a second longer than polite. "Yeah," he said slowly. "I think I do." He waved me into his office and shut the door. "What's going on?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. I took a breath. I didn't dump everything on him. I just slid the loan statement across the desk. Frank's eyes dropped to it. His smile vanished. He read once, then again. "Did you sign this?" he asked. "No," I said. He nodded like he'd expected that answer. I thought not. That scared me more than anything else. He leaned forward. "How long have you known?" "Less than a day," I said. "How bad is it?" Frank sighed. "Depends on what you do next." He tapped the paper. "This isn't nothing, Rick, but it's not the end either. Not yet." I felt my shoulders sag just a little. They said I stopped myself. I overheard them. My wife and stepdaughter. They think if I find out we lose everything. Frank shook his head. "People say a lot of things when they're scared." He met my eyes. "You don't lose everything by finding out. You lose everything by doing nothing." I sat there, hands clenched together, and felt something shift inside me again. Not break. Set. I left the credit union an hour later with my head full of terms I'd never wanted to learn and one clear understanding. This wasn't a leak you ignored and hoped would stop on its own. This was a rupture. And if I didn't shut it down the right way, it was going to flood everything I had left. Frank didn't try to scare me. That came later on its own. What he did that afternoon was worse in a quieter way. He explained things calmly, like a man showing you a cracked beam and trusting you to understand what it meant. He leaned back in his chair, hands folded on his stomach. "First thing you need to know, Rick, is this isn't just about a signature. It's about disclosure." "Disclosure," I repeated. He nodded. "When you use a primary residence as collateral, every party with ownership has to be fully informed. Not just sign, informed. If that didn't happen, if material information was withheld, there's a problem. A big one." I stared at the paper on his desk. So what do I do? Frank didn't answer right away. He stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the parking lot, where a couple was arguing quietly beside a minivan. Before I answer that, he said, "Let me tell you something." He turned back to me, his expression softer now. "You're not the first man to sit in that chair with that look on his face." I glanced up. "You?" Frank snorted once without humor. "Yeah, me." He sat back down slowly. 20 years ago, my ex-wife took out a line of credit using our house. Said it was for renovations, kitchen, bathroom, all that. Turns out it was to keep her brother's business afloat. I didn't know until a notice came in the mail with my name on it. My chest tightened. "What happened?" "I froze," he said. "Same as you. Thought if I didn't move, maybe it wouldn't get worse." And it got worse, he said plainly. I waited, I trusted. And by the time I acted, the damage was already baked in. He leaned forward. "I'm telling you this so you don't make my mistake." The room felt smaller all of a sudden. Frank tapped the desk. "Here's the good news. You caught this early, and you didn't confront them yet." "I almost did," I admitted. "I know," he said. "Most men would have. That's where things go sideways." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a yellow legal pad, sliding it toward me. "Write this down." I picked up the pen with fingers that still didn't feel entirely steady. "Step 1, Frank said. You don't tip your hand. Not to your wife, not to your stepdaughter, nobody." I wrote. "Step 2, he continued, you educate yourself. Don't rely on me. Don't rely on a lawyer alone. You need to understand what's happening so you don't get pushed around." I looked up. "How?" "Library," he said. "Public library. They've got consumer finance guides, plain English stuff. Look up secured loans, spousal disclosure forged or unauthorized signatures. Take notes." I nodded slowly. "Step 3, he said, you document everything. Copies, dates, screenshots. If it exists, you keep a record." And then I asked. Frank exhaled. "Then we talk about the credit union, internal review, formal complaint, maybe a lawyer, but only when you're ready." I sat back in my chair, the pad heavy on my knee. "What about them?" Frank's eyes flicked up. "That's the hardest part." He hesitated. "You're going to have to live like nothing's wrong for a while." I swallowed. "I don't know if I can do that." "You can," he said gently, "because the alternative is worse." I left his office feeling like I'd been handed a map through a minefield. Useful, but terrifying. That night, I didn't go home right away. I drove past the VFW post on Army Post Road, the one with the faded flag out front, and the parking lot that always smelled faintly of cigarettes and old oil. I almost pulled in out of habit, then kept driving. Instead, I went to the Des Moines Public Library downtown. It was quieter than I expected, warm, safe in a way my house didn't feel anymore. I sat at a long wooden table under a green-shaded lamp and started pulling books off the shelf. Consumer finance, home equity, borrower rights. I wasn't reading like a lawyer. I was reading like a maintenance man, looking for patterns, weak points, places where things failed. By the time the librarian announced they were closing, my notebook was half full. I learned about material misrepresentation, about duty to disclose, about how a signature could be considered invalid if it was obtained under false pretenses. I also learned something else. I wasn't crazy. Over the next week, I settled into a routine I never wanted. During the day, I went to work like always. I fixed boilers. I replaced valves. I signed work orders, real ones, with my real signature. I watched my own hand carefully the way you do when you realize someone's been copying it. At night, I played my part. Linda made dinner. We watched the news. She complained about her feet hurting. I nodded at the right moments. Megan came and went. She talked about job leads that never materialized. She asked if I'd looked at her resume yet. Soon I told her. Inside, something cold settled into place. Sunday night, we sat down for dinner together. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans from a can. Linda lit a candle like it was a special occasion. Megan laughed about something she'd seen online. I chewed, swallowed, and said casually, Hy-Vee was packed today. Everyone must be gearing up for the holidays. Linda smiled. I need to get baking supplies. Megan nodded. Same. I looked at her and thought, you forged my name and you're talking about flour. But what I said was, they moved the sugar aisle. Took me 10 minutes to find it. Linda laughed. Figures. I excused myself after dinner and went to the basement to check a leak. Down there, surrounded by concrete walls and exposed pipes, I felt more at home than I had in weeks. I pulled out the folder I'd copied and sat on the bottom step reading through it again. There was fear, yes, and anger, but there was also something else now. Clarity. I wasn't dealing with monsters. I was dealing with people who'd convinced themselves that crossing one line would save them. They were wrong. And for the first time since that afternoon in the kitchen, I felt something like balance returning. I knew what I had to do. I just had to do it without blinking. The first crack showed up on a Wednesday night, the kind of quiet weekday where nothing dramatic is supposed to happen. I came home just after 6. Snow had started falling in thin, lazy sheets, the kind that doesn't look dangerous until it's covered everything. Linda was already home, standing at the stove, stirring something that smelled like tomato sauce and garlic. "You're late," she said without turning around. "Boiler inspection ran long," I replied. True enough, it always did when I needed an excuse. She nodded, but something in her posture felt stiff. The wooden spoon scraped the bottom of the pot a little harder than usual. Megan wasn't there yet. We ate in relative silence. The radio murmured in the background local news, a traffic update, a reminder about an upcoming blood drive at a church on the south side. Normal life trying its best to keep going. Halfway through dinner, Linda put her fork down. So she said too casually, "You've been distracted lately." I looked up at her. "Have I?" She met my eyes and held them. "You've been quiet. You're on your phone more. And you went to the credit union last week." There it was. I felt my pulse jump, but my face stayed still. Years of dealing with school administrators had taught me how to do that. "I had some questions about retirement," I said. "I'm not getting any younger." "That's funny," she said, forcing a smile. "Because Frank called here yesterday." My chest tightened. "Frank?" She nodded. "Asked for you. Said it was about paperwork." I took a slow sip of water, buying myself a second. "Yeah," I said evenly. "I asked him something. Didn't think it was a big deal." Linda studied me like she was trying to read a gauge she didn't fully understand. "Well," she said, picking up her fork again, "you should tell me when things like that happen." I nodded. "You're right." She relaxed just a little, but the damage was done. The system had started to rattle. Later that night, after Megan came home and disappeared into her room, Linda followed me into the living room. I was pretending to watch TV, some rerun I didn't care about. "Rick," she said softly, sitting beside me, "is everything okay?" I muted the TV. "What do you mean, Sursu, we're on Imonasonin?" She hesitated. "You just feel distant, like you're somewhere else." For a moment, I almost told her everything. The folder, the signature, the nights at the library, the quiet planning. But then she said something that shut that door. "You know," she added, eyes narrowing just a touch, "sometimes men get distant when there's someone else." The word hung there between us. Someone else. I stared at her stunned. Of all the things she could have accused me of, that was the one I'd never expected. "Are you serious?" I asked. She shrugged, trying to look casual, but I could see the calculation behind it. "I'm just saying, it happens." In that moment, something inside me went very still. This wasn't just fear anymore. This was deflection. Gaslighting, if you wanted to use the fancy word. Turning the light so the shadows pointed at me instead of them. "No," I said quietly. "There's no one else." She watched me closely, as if hoping I'd crack. When I didn't, she stood up. "All right," she said. "I just wanted to be sure." She went to bed without another word. I sat there long after the TV credits rolled, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. The next day, Megan called me while I was at work. I was in the mechanical room at a middle school, the sound of machinery humming around me. "Hey, Dad," she said. Her voice was tight. "Mom says you've been asking questions." "Just planning ahead," I said. There was a pause on the line. "You're not doing anything, are you?" she asked. I leaned against a concrete wall, the chill seeping through my jacket. "Doing what?" "You know," she said quickly, "anything that could complicate things." Complicate things. My hand tightened around the phone. Why would I do that? Another pause, then softer, almost pleading. "Because if this blows up Rick, I lose everything." There it was again. The same phrase. I closed my eyes. "Megan," I said slowly, "did you know my name was on those papers?" She inhaled sharply. "Dad." "Did you know?" I repeated. Silence. That silence told me everything. "Please," she said finally, her voice cracking. I messed up. I was trying to fix it. If you step in now, it all falls apart. I pictured her at 5 years old sitting on my shoulders at the 4th of July parade waving a tiny flag. I pictured the night I helped her move into her dorm carrying boxes up 3 flights of stairs. My throat burned. I can't fix this for you, I said. Not this way. Her voice hardened. So you're choosing this over me? I swallowed. I'm choosing not to disappear. She hung up without another word. That night, alone in the basement, I sat on the cold steps with a stack of copied documents in my lap. The concrete smelled damp. A pipe dripped somewhere behind the wall, slow, steady, impossible to ignore once you noticed it. I thought about all the times I'd told myself it was easier to keep the peace. All the times I'd patched something instead of replacing it. This wasn't a patch job. I called the attorney Frank had recommended, left a message, set the next step in motion. As I climbed the stairs, I glanced at the family photo hanging on the wall. Linda, Megan, me all smiling in front of the house we'd nearly lost. I almost stopped, I whispered to the empty basement, but not this time. The meeting was scheduled for 10:00 a.m. on a Thursday. I arrived at Midwest Community Credit Union at 9:42 and sat in my truck with the engine off, watching my breath fog the windshield. Snow from the night before had been plowed into gray piles along the curb. The building looked the same as it always had, low brick blue signage, nothing dramatic. That felt right. Because the most important moments in life rarely come with warning sirens. They come quietly, like a storm you don't hear until the roof starts to groan. I carried a thin folder under my arm as I walked inside. It held copies, clean, organized, tabbed. Frank had helped me prepare it, but every page had passed through my hands at least twice. I knew them the way I knew old boiler schematics. I could tell you where the weak points were without looking. Linda and Megan were already there. They sat side by side in the small glass-walled conference room, Linda clutching her purse on her lap, Megan tapping one heel against the chair leg like she was waiting for a bus. When they saw me, both of them stiffened. Linda stood first. "Rick," she said, forcing a smile. "I didn't realize you were coming." "I asked to be here," I replied. Megan's eyes flicked to the folder. Her jaw tightened. A man in a gray suit entered a moment later, followed by a woman with a tablet. The man introduced himself as Mark Ellis, branch manager. The woman was from compliance. They shook hands, polite, professional. "Thank you all for coming," Mark said. "We're here to review a secured loan and address some concerns that were raised." "Concerns?" Linda glanced at me sharply. "What concerns?" I didn't answer. I took my seat and placed the folder on the table, sliding it forward an inch. Mark noticed. His eyes lingered on it. "We'll begin by confirming the loan details," he said, pulling up information on his screen. "This loan was issued 4 months ago, secured by the Halverson residence. Signatures on file from both homeowners." Linda nodded quickly. "Yes, that's correct." Megan said nothing. Mark turned to me. "Mr. Halverson, do you acknowledge this loan?" I folded my hands in front of me. My palms were damp, but my voice came out steady. "No," I said, "I do not." The room went very still. Linda turned toward me, eyes wide. "Rick, I never authorized this loan," I continued. "I was not informed of its purpose, and the signature attributed to me is not mine." Megan's heel stopped tapping. The compliance officer raised her eyebrows slightly. "Mr. Halverson, are you alleging forgery?" "I'm alleging misrepresentation," I said, "and failure of disclosure." Mark cleared his throat. "That's a serious claim." "So is using a man's home as collateral without his knowledge," I replied. Linda's face had gone pale. "Rick, please," she whispered. "We can talk about this at home." I looked at her, then really looked. "We are talking about it," I said. "Here, where it belongs." I opened my folder and slid out the first document. "This is my signature," I said, pointing to a work authorization form from my job. "And this is the signature on the loan." I placed them side by side. "You don't need to be a handwriting expert to see they don't match," I said. "Different pressure, different stroke. It's like a joint that almost fits, but not quite." The compliance officer leaned forward, studying the pages. Megan finally spoke. "Dad, I told you." I raised my hand, not angrily, just enough to stop her. "Let me finish," I said. I slid another document forward. "This shows the mailing address was changed to an apartment I do not reside in. I was not notified. This email confirmation was sent to an account I do not control." Linda's breath hitched. "I only did that because..." Because you didn't want me to see it, I said calmly. The words landed heavier than shouting ever could. Mark rubbed his chin. Ms. Halverson, he said to Linda, were you aware your husband had not reviewed these documents? Linda's eyes filled. I thought he trusted me. And did you disclose the risks associated with the loan, the compliance officer asked? Linda didn't answer. Megan shifted in her chair. Mom didn't understand everything, she said quickly. I handled the paperwork. I explained it. The compliance officer's head snapped toward her. You handled the paperwork. Megan froze. Yes, she said after a moment. I mean, she asked me to help. Were you aware the signature was not his? The compliance officer asked. The question hung in the air like a dropped wrench. Megan looked at Linda, then at me. I knew it might not be exact, she said quietly. But we needed the loan. The business was failing. If we didn't act fast. So you knew, I said. Her shoulders sagged. Linda covered her mouth with her hand. Megan, she whispered. You said. I said it would be fine, Megan snapped. I said he'd never know. There it was. Out in the open. No whispers. No kitchen corners. The compliance officer tapped a few notes into her tablet. Thank you, she said coolly. That answers several questions. Mark exhaled slowly. Given what's been disclosed, this loan will be frozen immediately pending investigation. There may be further actions required. Linda began to cry then, not loudly, just a quiet broken sound. Megan stared straight ahead, her face tight. I felt no triumph, no rush. Just a deep, steady sense of something being set right. I'm not here to punish anyone, I said. I'm here to stop the damage. I closed the folder. I can forgive, I added, meeting Megan's eyes. But fairness has to be enforced. No one argued. The meeting ended shortly after. Papers were collected, statements were made. Linda didn't touch me as we walked out. Megan rushed ahead, shoulders hunched. I lingered a moment, then followed. Outside, the air was sharp and clean. The sky was pale blue like it had been scrubbed. I stood on the sidewalk and let the cold bite my face. For the first time in months, I knew exactly where I stood. I didn't go home with them. Linda asked if we could talk right there in the parking lot, her voice thin and shaking, but I told her I needed time. And for once, I didn't explain myself. I didn't soften it. I just said it plainly, like a man calling in a work order. I need space, I said. We'll talk later. Megan didn't say a word. She kept her eyes on her phone like there was something urgent happening on that screen that required all her attention. I recognized that look now. It wasn't distraction. It was avoidance. I got in my truck and drove. Not far, just far enough to breathe. I ended up at Greenwood Park, the small one near the river. The snow muffled everything. A few geese stood around looking offended by the weather. I sat on a bench, my hands shoved deep into my coat pockets, and let the quiet settle. For the first time since that afternoon in my kitchen, my chest didn't feel tight. The credit union froze the loan that same day. A formal investigation followed, statements, paperwork, lawyers talking in careful tones. It wasn't fast, it wasn't clean, but it was fair. Linda moved in with her sister for a while. Megan stopped coming by altogether. The house felt enormous without them. At first, the silence scared me. I'd spent most of my life filling quiet with responsibility, with fixing things, providing smoothing edges. Now there was nothing to fix but myself. So I started small. I packed up the spare room, the one that had turned into a paper graveyard. I donated boxes of old junk to Goodwill. I shredded documents I no longer needed. Each bag I carried out felt like a pound off my back. A month later, I put the house on the market. People were surprised by that. Frank asked if I was sure. Linda cried when she found out. Megan accused me of erasing the family. But here's the truth. Nobody likes to hear sometimes. The only way to save yourself is to walk away from what almost destroyed you. I bought a small one-bedroom apartment not far from work. Nothing fancy. Clean lines, new pipes. Everything worked the way it was supposed to. The first night there, I slept straight through until morning. On my second weekend, I noticed the kitchen faucet had a slow drip. Just one drop every few seconds. Old me would have ignored it for weeks. This time I fixed it right away. I shut off the water, replaced the washer, tightened everything down until it fit the way it should. When I turned the handle back on, the drip was gone. I stood there longer than necessary, listening to the silence. A few weeks later, I ran into Frank again, this time at the community hall after a pancake breakfast fundraiser. We sat with paper plates and bad coffee. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, better than okay." He smiled. "That's good." I thought about everything I'd lost and everything I hadn't. I didn't walk away with the house, I said, but I walked away with my name. Frank raised his cup. "That's worth more." Linda and I talk now. Carefully, honestly. What happens next, I don't know yet. But for the first time in a long time, whatever comes will be built on truth. And Megan, I still hope she finds her footing. I hope she learns that shortcuts always cost more in the end. As for me, I wake up each morning knowing the system I live in is stable again. No hidden leaks, no forged parts, no whispers behind my back. If this story hit close to home, if you've ever stayed quiet to keep the peace or ignored a warning sign because it was easier, I want you to remember this. You're allowed to protect what you spent your life building. You're allowed to demand fairness, and it's never too late to choose yourself. If you found something familiar in my story, take a moment to reflect on it. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want more stories grounded in real life, told honestly and without noise, consider subscribing. Take care of yourself.